The Witcher, I wanted to do something a little unusual this time. I have 3 episodes left in season 3 to do, and one of them spends an uncomfortable amount of time in a desert looking at a horse's knackers, and that's still preferable to Valdo Marx. So what I wanted to do was go all the way back and review the first ever episode of the show, because I like season 1 quite a lot. If this video does well, I may cover every episode. But first, cosplay corner, I suppose. I've been covering a lot of cosplay of the female characters and young women wearing quite revealing clothing, so today I thought I'd get a bit more gender balance. So just for the female viewers, if I have any left, let's look at some people cosplaying as Geralt. There you go, ladies. So don't say I don't do anything for you, and the amount of effort that some women go to do cosplay. Oh fine, there you go, you can have some man cosplay. Fine, there's a rugged looking man for you. And this lady claims to have made that costume herself. That's not so much different to Geralt's actual costume in the show. So let's go back into the mists of time, into another world, that of December 2019, where it all began, the first outing of Henry Cavill as the Witcher, because I had some revelations watching these episodes again, with the hindsight of having watched series 2 and 3, and having been reading the books. In short, I think the structural problems in the show have been there right from the start, but there was enough good in there to make people, including me, not notice or at least tolerate the bad. So we start out, and from second 1 of the episode we've already diverted from the content of the first book in multiple ways, and the first book can be very vague about when anything is supposed to be happening, a lot like the show is, but the book and show start in completely different places, and the show makes the timeline extremely confusing. In the show, the first episode is 2 separate stories cut together, Geralt at Blaviken and Ciri at the Fall of Sintra, and although the show makes it look like they're happening at the same time, Geralt at Blaviken is instead happening 33 years or so before the Fall of Sintra. Not only had Ciri not been born yet, her mum had not been born yet. In fact, from episode 1, we have the Fall of Sintra in episode 1, Yennefer going to school in episode 2 happens 57 years before that. That's right, the events of episode 2 happen 57 years before half of the plotline to episode 1. In fact, in chronological terms, half of episode 1 is many years before the other half. In addition, most of episodes 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 happen years before Ciri's story that's going on in the same episodes, and the show never makes any of that clear. And believe it or not, I talked to quite a few people that watched The Witcher season 1 and for some reason found it confusing. And already we've hit on 2 of the problems. The timeline is a mess and has been from the start, and the showrunner is determined to lever in female characters and will do it even if it makes the story worse or outright breaks it. The showrunner wanted the series to have a balance between 3 characters, Ciri, Geralt and Yennefer, so stories that were from Geralt's point of view in the original book and were quite straightforward had to be altered majorly in order to do that. Altered and also made a lot more confusing. I found this quote from Lauren Histrick, the showrunner. The only thing that I did was that I made sure that we were presenting them all equally on screen. So she's meaning Geralt, Ciri and Yennefer. In the book, Geralt is obviously the protagonist, the Witcher, and we meet these characters only through his adventures. But if you equalise these 3 characters' presence on screen, in essence what you've done is make Geralt about 1/3 of the total screen time. In the series adaptation of The Witcher is only going to be there about 1/3 of the time, and this makes for a poor adaptation of the first book, where pretty much the whole thing is from Geralt's point of view. The book also starts in a completely different part of the story than the series does. The book starts with a short section with Geralt at Nenneker's sanctuary, in bed with a young lady healer rubbing herself vigorously against him, and to be fair, that would make me feel better too. And then it launches into the story that in the series is most of episode 3. Geralt and Temeria trying to cure the princess that's been turned into a monster called a Striga, and it wasn't mixed up with a story from another time, it was just a standalone story in the first book, and that's where I would have started if it were me adapting the books. Instead, the series for some reason starts with the story of Geralt and Blaviken with Renfrey, and that happens almost a third of the way into the first book and several chapters in on page 40. And it also starts earlier than the book story did. The book story started with Geralt riding into Blaviken with a dead monster called a Kikimora on the back of his horse, whereas the series actually showed the fight with the Kikimora. And it was a good way to start off an episode in a series. And I think I prefer what they did in the show on this occasion, because it was a good fight scene and it was a believable addition to the story. I prefer the story of Blaviken with that fight sequence included. Right after the credits we hit another bunch of changes. In the book, Geralt goes to see the town's alderman, a person who he already knows and has worked with before, and this builds up a feeling of Geralt's age and experience. In the series, he instead goes to the tavern and meets Renfrey and her gang, and the alderman's daughter Marika, who he has never met before and who takes most of the alderman's role from the book. So now instead of seeing the town alderman about a reward, Geralt just takes the word of someone claiming to be his teenage daughter that there's no reward available, because again, they just had to lever in another female character. Even if it makes the story worse, even just gender swapping the alderman would have been less destructive to the story than this. This change makes Geralt look inexperienced and kind of gullible. But there's no reward for Geralt in either version for the Kikimora, so either the alderman or his daughter direct Geralt to a local mage called Irion, who may want to buy the body for magical ingredients, so they go together to the tower of this local mage. Now Irion is not interested in the Kikimora either, but he's very interested when a witcher comes to his door. So Geralt is invited into the mage's tower. In reality, Irion passed on a long time ago, and his identity is instead being used by another mage, one by the name of Stregobor. Again in the book, Stregobor was somebody that Geralt already know, and I don't know what to say. Stregobor has possibly the best sense of interior design I've ever seen. Stregobor is an illusionist, and in the books, the inside of the tower was a beautiful sunlit garden, with a naked blonde girl picking apples. Whereas in the series, there's just a load of very undressed, nicely shaped women tending to the garden, just a load of them. And they're everywhere, and again, it's a solid upgrade from the book. It's like a moving Renaissance painting. It has a nice fountain and everything, and maybe, hands down, one of the best gardens I've ever seen, and I don't know what to say. I'd be eating a lot of fruit. Stregobor appears to have grapes, pomegranates, apples, and he seems to have the peaches covered, well, kind of. Hands down, best scene in the series, and this is one of the times when I'm not going to argue against more female representation, and I can show you none of this on YouTube. Which is a shame, because there's nothing to be ashamed about the undressed human body, but we live in a time where some people can get offended by Michelangelo's David, where the naked human body is seen as dirty or distasteful, especially if it's male. And I wouldn't have even cared if there had been some undressed men in the episode to balance it up for the female viewers. I, for one, would be happily undressed in the garden scene, maybe a bit too happily actually. And Stregobor wants Geralt for a good reason. Stregobor is in hiding. He's wronged a princess turned criminal called Renfrey. Stregobor is a believer in a prophecy called the Curse of the Black Sun. And this goes, under an eclipse, 60 women would be born to noble houses, and they would be born evil and mutated, and would herald the destruction of humanity. Stregobor tried to end the lives of many girls of noble birth born during this time, and Renfrey was one of those girls. He tried, but she escaped, and is now out for blood. His blood. So he sealed himself in his frankly amazing tower. In trying to save humanity, he did a lot of very bad things. So Geralt is in the position that Stregobor wants him to get rid of Renfrey, and Renfrey wants Geralt to help her get rid of Stregobor for all of the horrible things he did, with each one telling Geralt that the thing that they were asking of him was merely the lesser of two evils. That's the name of the chapter in the book that this story comes from, and the story of Renfrey in the book is frankly kind of strange compared to in the series, where they cut it down and changed it. I've thought a lot about it, and I really don't see where Sapkowski was going with this, because you have a princess whose stepmother wants to get rid of her. The princess runs away after being pursued by a huntsman and takes up with a band of 7 gnomes, and the stepmother tries to poison her with an apple. Now, Sapkowski is clearly doing a reference to Snow White, but as much as I think about it, I have absolutely no idea why.
Fuck. Jesus.
You've got spunk and balls. And I like that in a woman.